The morning air was heavy with dust and silence in a small corner of Tondo, Manila, the kind of silence that lives in places forgotten by time and policy, where hope wears out faster than shoes. A thin fog of charcoal smoke drifted from a makeshift food cart, while distant sounds of laughter, the bright, free kind only children produce, echoed faintly from a nearby alley. But not all children laughed that morning. On a cracked cement step outside a fragile plywood home, a little black girl sat very still, her dark eyes locked on something that seemed to crush her spirit more than any word could. Her name was Amali. She was 10 years old. Her skin was the deep brown of rich earth, her hair twisted into 2 tight buns that she'd done herself that morning, with fingers more used to caregiving than play. In her lap sat her little brother, Tinashe, 6 years old, bony knees poking through faded red shorts, his legs dangling from her embrace like wilted branches. He wasn't crying. That was the thing. He wasn't even complaining. He just stared at the ground, his small feet covered in cuts, his toes bandaged with strips of an old t-shirt. Next to them lay a pair of broken flip-flops. The rubber soles were split in half, the straps gone, as if the shoes had simply given up. Amala picked one up and turned it over in her hands slowly, like she was examining a wound she didn't know how to heal. Her fingers traced the jagged tear in the rubber, and then she lowered her head, gently brushing the dust from her brother's ankles. He had tried to run earlier that morning, chasing other kids in a game of tag down the alley. The children had laughed, jumped, shouted, but Tinashe had slipped, caught his toe on a sharp piece of metal, and fallen hard. The blood was minor, but the shame wasn't. The shame of watching others run while he limped, of smiling through pain so his sister wouldn't worry. She had seen it all. And now, as she held him in her lap, her body a barrier between him and the world, the moment cracked something inside her. A tear rolled down her cheek, silent, solitary, but impossibly loud in its weight. It was not the kind of cry that demanded attention. It wasn't a tantrum or a plea. It was a surrender. A mourning for dignity stripped not by violence but by absence. The absence of something so simple it should have never been missing. Shoes. To understand the weight of that tear, one had to understand where they had come from. Amale and Tinashe were not from Manila. They had arrived 7 months ago with a group of displaced refugees from southern Africa, relocated through a missionary aid program. Their father had been killed in a conflict Amale never spoke about. Their mother had stayed behind, unable to get clearance. She had hugged them hard at the airport, whispering a promise in Amale's ear. "Take care of him. You are his voice now." And she had. Every day since arriving, Amale had cooked for him using scraps, washed his wounds, taught him to count in English. She had held his hand through crowded hospitals and packed community halls. She had learned how to smile for both of them, but on this morning, something was too heavy. The absence of shoes, the one thing she could not fix, felt like the unraveling thread of their already thin world. A local vendor noticed her, pausing his cart a few feet away. He pulled out his phone and quietly started recording. Not out of cruelty, but out of helplessness. Something about the girl's posture, shoulders curved forward like a mother twice her age, her hand stroking her brother's hair, her other holding a broken sandal like a relic, demanded to be witnessed. He filmed only 12 seconds. No words, no zoom. Just that raw, brutal image of a sister holding her brother like a lifeboat in a flood of quiet despair. That clip would travel faster than he imagined. By the next day, it had been posted on a local Facebook page titled "Faces of the Forgotten." The caption read, "She didn't cry for herself. She cried because her brother had no shoes." Within hours, it had been reshared thousands of times. Comment sections exploded with heartbreak and fury. "Where are the aid groups? This is unacceptable. What can we do?" But Amale and Tinashe didn't know any of that. They had no phone, no Wi-Fi, no access to a world that suddenly felt they owed them something. That afternoon, Amale carried her brother to a nearby church where a local nun offered free rice bowls. As they waited in line, Tinashe tugged on her shirt and whispered, "Am I going to get shoes soon?" Amale forced a smile, one that cracked on the edges. "Yes," she said softly. "They're on their way." She didn't know why she said it. She had no reason to believe it. But something in her chest, the same place where her mother's promise still echoed, made her say it. She needed to believe it, if only to keep him believing. What she didn't know was that across the city, in a high-rise hotel preparing for a sports press conference, a world champion boxer was about to see that same video. A man who knew exactly what it meant to have feet calloused by concrete and hunger gnawing at the edges of pride. A man who once ran barefoot through the streets of General Santos with dreams bigger than his neighborhood. A man who had never forgotten what it meant to be powerless. But for now, the girl sat still. No idea her image was traveling the globe. No knowledge that in 48 hours her world would change. She only knew the dust on her brother's wounds, the way the sunlight hit the broken sandal in her lap, and the quiet ache that wrapped around them like a fog. Her tear dried on her cheek, but its weight remained. The television flickered in the corner of the hotel suite, muted as usual. Manny Pacquiao never liked background noise before a fight or a press conference. It distracted him from the thoughts that mattered. Instead, he focused on routine. The tight lacing of his leather shoes, the slow roll of his wrists as he rotated his joints, the soft crack of his neck as he tilted it side to side. At 46, the man who had once been called the fighting pride of the Philippines was more legend than athlete now. Retired but not retired, public but deeply private, both present and past at once. He had a briefing scheduled in an hour, a sponsor event, then a talk at a local boxing gym. After that, a meeting with a youth rehabilitation center. His days were full, always. Not because he needed the attention, God knew he'd had enough, but because his spirit had never learned how to sit still. Stillness for Manny was where poverty used to creep in. He filled every space in his life with purpose, so the ghosts of his boyhood hunger wouldn't return. But this morning was different, because just as he reached for his blazer, his eyes landed on the television, and there she was. A still image held the screen for a few moments, a young black girl sitting on a cement step, clutching her little brother in her lap. No music, no flashy graphics, just her eyes. And in them, something he recognized, like the smell of his mother's cooking or the dry sting of sleep on concrete. That was the look of a child who had tasted the ache of being forgotten. He stared. Manny picked up the remote and turned up the volume. The news anchor was narrating a story about a viral video 12 seconds long that had swept across social media in less than a day. It had been recorded by a vendor in Tondo, showing a girl silently crying because her brother had no shoes. The broadcaster used words like heartbreaking, unthinkable, and call to action, but Manny didn't hear any of that. He only saw her. The way her arms curled around the boy, the sandal in her lap, the way she stared at his feet, as if looking at a wound she'd failed to prevent. He turned off the television. Manny stood still for a long time. Then he pulled out his phone and called his personal aide. "Find her," he said simply. "I want to know her name before the sun goes down." The aide, confused but obedient, asked a few questions. "There's no name," he said. "The video is raw. No school tag, no clear address. It was posted on some community outreach page." Manny's voice was low and firm. "Then start there." Within hours, the full machinery of his outreach foundation was mobilized. Calls went out to local barangays, non-profits, churches, and refugee aid centers. Volunteers drove through the streets of Tondo, showing the still frame of the girl's face to teachers, vendors, and pastors. Most people shook their heads. No one knew her name. She wasn't from around here. That much was clear. She had come from somewhere else, she and her brother. They were ghosts in a city overflowing with the unseen. But on the second day, a woman named Sister Lourdes recognized her. She was a nun at a Catholic mission school that offered basic education to children with no documentation. She didn't know much, but she knew the girl's name was Amale and that she had a little brother named Tinashe. She didn't know their last names. She only knew they came from a refugee camp months ago, brought by a South African missionary who had since returned home. Their mother was not with them. That night, Manny Pacquiao sat quietly on his bed, staring at the notes his assistant had scribbled. No last name, no official identity, no permanent residence, just two children in the seams of a city that barely acknowledged their existence. He thought about his own boyhood, how he used to beg for food outside bakeries, how he fought in the streets for coins to buy rice. He thought about the time he sold his pet dog for 20 pesos to buy medicine for his sick mother. Pain had a language and he spoke it fluently. He made a decision before dawn. By mid-morning the next day, Manny arrived at the mission school unannounced, wearing jeans and a plain white shirt. No press, no entourage, only his assistant and a driver. Sister Lourdes met him with wide eyes and trembling hands. "She's here," she said, voice low. "She's drawing just now before class." In a back room with chipped paint and mismatched desks, Amale sat with a box of broken crayons and a piece of recycled paper. She was sketching shoes, dozens of them. Big ones, small ones, colorful, winged, some with laces she couldn't afford, some with soles made of dreams. Tinashe sat beside her, quietly watching. Manny stepped into the doorway, and for a long moment, he said nothing. He just watched her, this little girl who had ignited something in him that the world's titles never had. She noticed him eventually and froze. Her eyes went wide, unsure, maybe even a little afraid. He walked in slowly, knelt down to her level, and took a small box from under his arm. He opened it and pulled out a pair of new running shoes, simple, durable, clean. Not designer, not flashy, just right. He turned to Tinashe and smiled. "May I?" he asked. The boy looked at his sister, unsure. Amale nodded. Manny carefully took the boy's small foot in his hand, rough with scars and old blisters, and slipped on the shoe, then the other. He tied the laces gently and pressed the tops to check the fit. Tinashe blinked. He looked down, then up, then smiled. Not wide, not loud, just soft and full, like something that had been asleep finally woke up. Amale started to cry. Not like before. This time it was different. It was release. It was gratitude. It was the feeling of being seen. Manny sat back on the floor and took a breath. "You reminded me of someone," he said, not explaining who, and I couldn't ignore it. They talked for a little while. He asked about school, about her favorite subject, it was science, and about the shoes she had been drawing. "Those are for the children who have none," she said. "I wanted to make every kind, so everyone could choose." Before he left, he handed Sister Lourdes an envelope. It wasn't just money. It was a commitment to provide shelter, education, clothing, and emotional care for both children for at least 5 years. He didn't want his name on any plaque. He didn't want a headline. But word still got out. One of the volunteers snapped a photo from behind the door, Manny Pacquiao sitting cross-legged on the school floor, tying the shoe of a barefoot boy while a little girl wept beside them. The image went viral in less than an hour, but this time it wasn't about outrage or pity. It was about dignity, kindness, action. Donations poured in, shoes, books, food, letters from children around the world who had seen the story and wanted to help. Schools launched campaigns, athletes reposted the image. But for Manny, none of it mattered as much as the quiet moment in that classroom, the look on Amale's face when her brother stood up in those new shoes and took his first step like he finally belonged on the earth beneath him. He would return to see them again. Not once, not twice, but many times. He'd sit with them, eat with them, laugh at Tinashe's jokes, listen to Amale's ideas for an invention that could grow shoes with a child's feet. He didn't want to be a savior. He wanted to be a bridge between the life he escaped and the lives he could still change. Because some victories don't come with belts. Some come with silence and shoes and the soft echo of small feet no longer walking alone. Months had passed. The viral video had quieted. The news cycles had shifted. And the world, so often breathless in its hunger for the next heartbreak, had moved on. But for Amale and Tinashe, everything had changed. They no longer lived in the crumbling wooden shack off the alleyway in Tondo. After Manny Pacquiao's visit, his foundation, acting without fanfare, had quietly relocated the siblings to a modest 2-room apartment within a secure community center near Quezon City. It had electricity that didn't flicker, walls that didn't sweat when it rained, and running water that came out clear. For the first time in her short life, Amale could close a door at night and know that she and her brother were safe. Tinashe now attended a small international primary school on a full scholarship. He wore his uniform like armor, his name printed on a laminated badge, his feet snug in a rotating pair of clean sneakers, one of which still happened to be the very first pair Manny had given him. Amale had been placed in a specialized program designed for refugee children with interrupted schooling. She absorbed language like a sponge, English, Tagalog, even bits of Visayan, and had started journaling with such detail that one of her teachers secretly began saving her essays, convinced the girl was writing the early chapters of something much bigger. But what no one could truly grasp, not even the foundation workers, the school staff, or the donors who sent well-meaning letters, was the invisible shift that had taken place inside Amale. Her understanding of the world, of power and presence and kindness, had expanded beyond anything a child her age was supposed to hold. She didn't smile like a girl who had been rescued. She smiled like someone who had been witnessed. That distinction mattered. Each night before sleep, she wrote a single sentence in a small red notebook. A ritual, one sentence a night. Some were fragments of dreams. Today I saw a bird steal bread, and I laughed. Others were deeper, older than her body. When my brother is okay, my lungs open better. But on the night that marked 3 months since the shoes arrived, she wrote, "He didn't just bring shoes, he gave my brother a place in the world." What Manny had done had not been charity, it had been restoration. But the story didn't end there. Amale's essay about that day, the one she wrote for a school contest titled "The Kindest Act I've Ever Seen," was published in a local Manila newsletter. It began modestly. "My brother used to walk on wounds." It ended with a line that would echo far beyond the walls of her classroom. "Some people fight in rings, some fight so others don't have to." The essay found its way online, passed along by readers who recognized something sacred in her simplicity. Within a week, it had been translated into 5 languages. Shoe companies launched donation drives under the slogan, "Walk because you can." Churches screened Amale's story in Sunday services. Activists printed her quote on posters in protests for refugee rights. An NGO from Europe reached out to the foundation and offered to sponsor Amale's continued education through university, should she wish to pursue it. She did. Meanwhile, her mother, lost in the bureaucratic machinery of a refugee system 2 continents away, had been thought unreachable. But Pacquiao's team had not stopped searching. Working quietly with international partners and aid agencies, they traced her through a series of correspondence left behind by the missionary who had helped bring the children to Manila. They discovered she was alive, staying in a temporary shelter near Durban, South Africa, waiting for a reunification visa that had stalled for over a year. Manny never made a public statement about what he did next. He didn't tweet. He didn't call a press conference. He didn't post a single photo. He simply paid the processing fees, retained a legal liaison, and ensured that every piece of documentation necessary was filed with urgency. He wrote a personal letter addressed to the strongest mother I've never met, and asked that it be hand-delivered. It arrived with a plane ticket. 6 weeks later, at Ninoy Aquino International Airport, Amale and Tinashe stood by the arrivals gate in clothes they had chosen carefully. Amale in a white dress she said made her feel like a blank page, and Tinashe in a navy blue button-up that he kept tugging at with nervous fingers. A camera crew from a local network stood a respectful distance away. The foundation had allowed them to document the reunion under strict rules. No sensationalism, no questions, no interruption. When their mother emerged from the glass doors, Amale froze. The woman was thinner, older than she remembered, her eyes sunken but sharp. For one suspended second, neither moved. Then Tinashe screamed, "Mama!" And the rest became a blur of arms, tears, breathless laughter, and the collapse of 3 bodies into a single embrace that felt like the world had finally stopped spinning in the wrong direction. Manny was there, standing far in the background, sunglasses on, arms crossed. He didn't approach, he didn't wave, but Amale saw him. Just before they were escorted out of the terminal, she turned, met his eyes, and mouthed the words, "Thank you." He nodded, just once. That was enough. The footage of that moment aired quietly on late-night television. No voiceover, no added music. Just a caption at the bottom, "Reunited." Back at home, Amale returned to her red notebook and wrote her longest sentence yet. "It's not the shoes, the house, or the school. It's that someone believed we mattered before we could prove it." Life didn't become perfect. There were still government forms, cultural adjustments, paperwork. Her mother had to learn new systems, build a job skill set, find language classes. There were bad days. She struggled with night terrors for weeks. Amale had to learn how to share her brother's love again, how to let go of the identity she had formed as both sister and mother. But they were together. Manny continued his visits, not just with them, but with others like them. He funded more quiet reunions. Shoes turned into scholarships, scholarships turned into mentorships. The story of the girl who cried not for herself but for her brother became part of a broader curriculum in a regional empathy-based education program, funded by the very foundation that once operated out of a single Manila office. Amale herself was invited to speak at youth forums, always introduced not as the refugee girl, but as the writer with the shoes story. Years later, when she was asked by a foreign journalist what that moment had truly meant, when Manny Pacquiao knelt before her brother and tied his shoes, she didn't pause to reflect. It meant someone saw the wound and didn't look away. It meant we weren't invisible anymore. And when the journalist asked what she thought Pacquiao's legacy would be, she smiled and said, "Most people will remember the fighter. I'll remember the man who got on his knees." Some gestures vanish in applause. Others echo for generations. This one began with a tear, traveled through a pair of shoes and ended in something more permanent than fame. Dignity restored, lives rewoven, and one little girl's simple act of love answered by another's act of unbelievable kindness.